Mr. Riston, do you have any evidence to support your claim the DFO is being purposefully negligent? You made a pretty bold statement here before the committee, indicating that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is being willfully negligent in studying things like sea lice and so on in order to fulfill their mandate of being pro-fish farm. Do you have any ATIPs, any information, any records that would support your claim?
Yes. And I did not call them willfully negligent. I think this is not negligent conduct. I think this is deliberate conduct. You'll all be familiar with the Cohen Commission's failure to be able to find what Justice Cohen referred to as the smoking gun. I think we may have found it. It's a new study that's come out of the SSHI dealing with a bacterium called Tenacibaculum. I am going to henceforth refer to it by the disease it causes, which is mouth rot.
What you just heard were excerpts from Ms. Karen Riston, Executive Director of Living Ocean Society's official testimony to the Canadian Federal Government Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Ms. Riston believes there was a deliberate attempt made by employees within DFO to keep the new science, that is, the smoking gun killing wild salmon populations, away from Canada's Fisheries Minister days before she made the decision to phase out all fish farms in the Discovery Islands. The minister's decision could then be challenged in court, and without any new evidence or record of decision to support the minister's decision to phase out fish farms, the judge would only be allowed to use the latest evidence on environmental impacts, which was limited to outdated DFO research that the farms pose no more than a minimal risk to wild stocks. The clips and events that you are about to see are dramatic enough to warrant a Netflix special. On December 15, 2020, Dr. Miller Saunders summarized the results of work she had been communicating to DFO aquaculture staff for over a year on mouth rot and the survival population's impact of wild salmon. She did so in both a lay format and a technical format in an email address to the senior science and aquaculture management staff. She was subsequently asked by Carmel Lowe, Science Director, to summarize it further in the form of a briefing note for a ministerial briefing, which she did December 15th to 16th. In the course of a day, serious and realistic concerns that Fraser River sockeye are experiencing mortality of up to 87.9% from T. maritium in the Discovery Islands. This required extreme caution considering the perilous state of many Fraser sockeye populations, and was watered down to unpublished results suggest link and paper in progress by senior DFO aquaculture management. Nothing in the material discloses whether or not the minister saw the briefing dated December 16th prior to making her decision. On December 17, 2020, Minister Bernadette Jordan announced that all 19 fish farms in the Discovery Islands would be phased out by June 30, 2022, acting against the science advice from her own department when the minister added a subsequent decision to bar the transfer of smolts from hatcheries to the ocean pens, essentially a ban on January 20th, 2021, an announcement was made that salmon farms in the Discovery Islands were going to seek judicial review of the federal phase-out of fish farms in the Discovery Islands, aiming for an injunction to the ban. On April 5th, 2021, a federal court judge suspended the ban on restocking 3 fish farms in British Columbia's Discovery Islands. Justice Peter George Pamel said the consequences for local communities and businesses outweigh any evidence he heard on environmental impact, which was limited to a fisheries department finding that the farms pose no more than a minimal risk to wild stocks. On April 26, 2021, Dr. Miller Saunders delivered her much-anticipated testimony to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and we will leave it with you to draw your own conclusions.
Good afternoon, committee members. So I'm Rebecca Reed. I'm the Regional Director General for DFO Pacific Region. I invite Dr. Christy Miller Saunders to provide a more in-depth description of her field of research.
Ms. Dr. Christy Miller Saunders. I hold a PhD from Stanford University and have been a research scientist with DFO since 1994. My areas of specialty include molecular biology, genetics and genomics, ecology, and fish health. I have worked on salmon for all of my career at DFO and issues surrounding salmon health and salmon declines for the past 20 years, with at least 75 of the 140 publications from my program focused on fish stress and disease. The Straterium tenacibaculum maritimum responsible for significant mortality on salmon farms, is strongly associated with annual variance in survival and low weight sockeye, chinook, and coho. For sockeye, the highest incidence of infection is in fish sampled near farms in the Discovery Islands. Tenacibaculum is the agent. Mouth rot is a disease that the agent causes in Atlantic salmon. So it's not mouth rot that has the impact. But as I said before, tenacibaculum was coming out in our models as being one of the most consistently associated with population level impacts. But moreover, in sockeye salmon, we found that the highest incidence of infection was in fish migrating past farms in the Discovery Islands. And we then employed spatial and epidemiological models and fit the data from migrating sockeye salmon to identify whether farms in Discovery Islands were a source or the dominant source of tenacibaculum infection along the Fraser River sockeye salmon migration route. We not only did the models confirm that, the best fitted models confirmed that the highest source of tenacibaculum was around the Discovery Island farms. We were also able to show that that in the water column, that tenacibaculum was one of the agents most strongly concentrated around active farms compared to fallow farms. So there was a lot of tenacibaculum in the water column. Further, we looked at whether or not treatment of mouth rot was a correlated factor with the potential transmission into wild fish. We did not find that there was any effective treatment, that simply a farm being stocked with fish was enough to create a risk to wild migrating salmon.
Ms. Reid, when Dr. Miller-Saunders reported to senior management last October that the bacteria widespread in salmon farms causing mouth rot is accumulating outside the salmon farms in the Discovery Islands, infecting sockeye and causing a negative population impact, I see from an ATIP that was sent to me that salmon farmers were briefed. I guess my question is, was the minister also briefed on this as she was in consultation with the 7 First Nations of the Discovery Islands? And would this have been important to share with the local First Nations?
So just with regards to the information sharing within the department, we certainly would share information of that nature for context and for general awareness. With regards to the consultation process that went on with First Nations, I wasn't actually in the room with them, so I can't speak specifically to that. If you wish, I think Dr. Parsons could speak more specifically to some of those conversations.
Thank you. The specific point about tenacibaculum was not brought up as part of the technical briefings that we had with the First Nations. Their primary interest in the briefings that we did provide really revolved around the 9 risk assessments that have been completed and published.
Was the minister briefed?
I wasn't involved in any of the briefings with the minister or with the minister's consultations with the First Nations.
Can anyone confirm if the minister was briefed on this?
So what I can confirm, Mr. Johns, is that the issue was definitely raised to the office, and that's as far as I could say.
With the identification of these new pathogens, I wouldn't want you to speculate, but it would seem that something has changed, obviously, if they didn't exist before, if they are new, if they were introduced or, again, naturally occurring. I guess the key question here is, though, the background of all of these pathogens being present in our wild salmon population. Can we do anything about that, or are we simply going to have to watch the inevitable decline of our population because these pathogens are present and they'll keep circulating among our stocks?
Well, one of the reasons that we expect that pathogens may be more impactful today than they were in the past is not only the potential for interactions with cultured fish, and that could be our hatchery fish and aquaculture, but also the shift in the climate. And the relationship between pathogens and disease depends upon the susceptibility of the host, as well as the environmental conditions that are experienced. And so when you have salmon that are swimming through areas of very high temperature, that are experiencing low oxygen, that are that are experiencing lower food availability, they will be more vulnerable to picking up infections and to becoming diseased. And so it's not simply cultured fish, it's the combination of environmental change and cultured fish that may be, that should be considered when we're looking at disease-causing potential and the potential of disease to undermine survival of our wild salmon.
Has that virus, do you think, always been there, and it's just we've just found it, or we just discovered it because we just looked for it? Or
so we are trying to establish a baseline. One of the ways that you can determine how long a virus may have been here is through sequencing, and so you look at the depth of the sequencing phylogeny for the virus, and we do know that there are different variants that are here, and so we do see some depth in the sequences, which do suggest that they've been here for a period of time. We are planning to carry out more sequencing and actually do a more robust phylogenetic analysis, like we've done in PRV, which is a paper that is going to be coming out just in a couple of weeks. Where we can really more holistically look at the distribution across the province and in fish from Washington as well, because we do capture them along our coast, and try to get an idea of the depth of how long that virus may have been here and whether it likely evolved here on this coast.
My question is, if the minister approves the transfer of farm fish into the Discovery Islands, should they be screened for Tenacibaculum, given the low returns? And can you also maybe talk a little bit or explain how is the effect of natural occurring viruses different than viruses coming from fish farms?
Well, a lot of viruses coming from fish farms are also naturally occurring, so we have to be careful to think that they're two completely separate things. Tenacibaculum is not going to be an easy one to control because Tenacibaculum is found in marine fish as well as salmon, as well as farm fish. So it isn't only found in farm salmon. The issue with farm salmon is it may be considerably increased in terms of the abundance of Tenacibaculum released into the water column. And certainly the early eDNA studies or environmental DNA studies show that Tenacibaculum is concentrated around farms. I think that we do need to look again at treatment effects and what we can do in terms of decreasing the loads of that particular bacteria on those farms. As well as, our data actually do show that we're seeing Tenacibaculum present in farm fish before they've moved them out into the ocean, so that when they're introducing salt water into the hatcheries, they're already introducing that bacterium into their fish. The easiest way to control, maybe it may not be easy, but if the water going into a farm and the water exiting a farm was all filtered, like in closed containment systems or systems on land, we wouldn't have any of these problems because sea lice wouldn't infect farm fish because sea lice would be filtered out of the water column, and therefore they wouldn't affect our wild fish as well. You could do that with a lot of things like Tenacibaculum. Viruses will be harder, but the fact of the matter is if farm fish were less stressed, if they weren't stressed by sea lice and all the treatments and everything associated with them, they wouldn't have the same potential to develop disease. Disease wouldn't ensue to the same degree if we can control what comes in and what goes out of farms.
I've been most impressed with the level of competency that we've seen before this committee coming from the DFO personnel that has appeared from the scientific community and the research community. And Dr. Miller-Saunders, I'm impressed with your passion for the science that you're doing here and the cause that's at hand. So I truly hope that the groups that come together utilize the great resource that has been on display before this committee, that is within the scientific branch of DFO on a host of areas. We may not agree, we may not like the message, but it's clear from the witness that I've been listening to, you're bringing it in a non-biased stance, and I think that's extremely important. The decision makers simply have to listen.
And that expires all our time for today's committee meeting. I want to say a big thank you for departmental officials for appearing before committee today, and I agree with statements by the committee members that it's been probably one of the most informative meetings we've had on this subject for quite some time.
I urge everyone to watch it or read the evidence, as we also agree that this has to be one of the most informative meetings on the state of Pacific salmon. We will also provide a download link to the documents from the ATIP or Access to Information and Privacy request. If you are not already, be sure to subscribe to our video updates using the sign-up form below as we continue to follow this State of the Pacific Salmon series by the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you for joining me for the Tradex Foods 3-Minute Market Insight. This has been Kyla Hayward reminding you to stay safe, buy smart, and eat more seafood.